You seek the Holy Grail.
That is our quest. So anything that you could do to help would be very helpful.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. And we have a very special video here today. As you probably know from the thumbnail or the description, this is going to be 5 tips for purchasing that big comic book grail. And a friend of the channel, Hypercomic Comics, who has been on some of my live streams before, one member of the Comic Kingpins, actually joined me for a discussion in this video here today. So we have a pre-recorded video that I'm going to be playing for you guys. And we wanted to kind of, talk about that idea of purchasing a grail and maybe just sort of offer up, 5 tips that might be helpful for you guys who are watching when you also decide to make that grail purchase. So Hypercomic Comics had recently acquired a Hulk 181 for himself. So it felt like a good video to do in celebration of that. Hope you guys enjoy this, like, comment, subscribe, all those good things, and enjoy the video. Well, Hyper, thank you so much for hopping onto the channel.
Yeah, man, I think this is the second time I've been on your show. So yeah, glad to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you. Of course, if you guys are watching this video and you guys don't know Hypercomic Comics, he is one member of the Comic Kingpins. I'll put a link in the description to all their info. But, Hyper and I, we've known each other in kind of the comic book community for quite a while, and we talk all the time. And recently, Hyper, you acquired one of your major grail, your major comic book grails. And, in our conversation, we kind of were talking about like how, maybe making a video and talking about maybe some tips and discussing the process of acquiring that grail might be helpful to the community. So I guess, we're gonna kind of frame the conversation around 5 tips. And the first tip that we wanted to actually kind of put out to you guys is one that, might seem really obvious, but I think this one is really, really important. That tip number 1 is identify your grail. Like I said, this is almost one of the most important steps. And the reasons for that, at least for me, is that, comic book collecting, we are all susceptible to FOMO and getting caught in hype and being pulled in different directions. And there's a lot of books that we really, really want. But, if you're going to make that grail purchase, presumably this is going to be a dollar amount that you might feel a little bit uncomfortable with spending. Right. So identifying what the real grail for you is, that this is going to be the big book that you purchase, I think is really, that first important step.
Yeah. And the thing is, when we say identify your grail, it's not just picking out what book is your grail, but also identifying why it's your grail. Because the stronger the reason of why that book is your grail, the more likely you'll stay the course. I mean, if I was to only pick the 181 because my reason is because, it's a hot book and everyone else has it, that's not really giving me a strong enough conviction to actually go after that book. And eventually, I'm going to waver and I'll probably, lose interest at some point. Because this is not one of those books that, like you mentioned, it is going to cause a bit of discomfort on the price, in the price department. So it has to be a book you have a strong conviction about in actually getting in your collection.
Right. So in your instance, when you knew you wanted to get 181, like how did you come to the idea that was the grail book for you?
I always said like I favor the anti-heroes in comics. So my top 3 characters were always Wolverine, Venom, and Punisher. Now I got ASM 300 like a year into the hobby, and it wasn't that expensive back then. The only 2 books that I'm missing is ASM 129, First Appearance of Punisher, and Hulk 181, First Appearance of Wolverine. And I always peg Wolverine as the top.
What I hear from you is that being that Wolverine is one of your favorite characters, you felt pretty confident that getting a 181 was going to be a book that you were going to be happy having in your collection as your grail, because this is the character that like gives you that nostalgia, like brings you that joy, even beyond that of like the potential hype of seeing them come to the MCU and things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, if truth be told, it's that whole hype of him coming to the MCU that actually kind of forced me into getting the book sooner than later, because obviously you've seen how the market's gone, and the last thing I need is another price hike on that book.
Well, and this actually is going to be a good little setup for the transition to maybe our second tip. And this one is going to be do your research. I think your comment even just now about knowing that this character is coming to the MCU could be one type of research that you would need to do if there's a certain book that you maybe want to have as, a grail.
Yeah, because I mean, you definitely want to see the market and see the trends for that book. It's not a linear path for all books. Some books stay stagnant, some books have an exponential growth. Like in my case, if you were to track the time that I got back into the hobby in 2018 till now, that book, I would say it almost doubled. And like we mentioned before, grails are obviously a book that's out of your comfort zone. Nothing's worse than when you buy that book, you almost have buyer's remorse because you didn't take the time to research what's a good price.
And that's another part of like the doing the research where it's like, you have to kind of figure out, okay, I know what I'm comfortable spending. Here's what the prices are. Okay, what grades do that correspond to? And then just by looking at that, you realize, okay, I'm probably in the 3.0 range, just as far as like me as a buyer.
Exactly. And the thing is, it also helps when you have your ducks in a row and you have all the numbers. In my case, it helped when I had to negotiate the prices because the thing is, the price that the LCS that I bought from, I didn't pay that exact price. I actually paid much lower because I emailed them and I said, hey, look, I looked at the GPA analysis and I gave them an offer. And I kind of gave them like maybe $100 or $200 below the GPA just to kind of give myself a bit of wiggle room, just because I know that they're going to do a counter offer. Like, because the thing is, you could negotiate a lower price and you could still be overpaying because you don't know if that shop overinflated a book, right? So it helps from that negotiation perspective to actually have those prices in your head so you get a good price for yourself.
Right. And then just by being knowledgeable and being like, okay, I'm in it for the 3.0. I know that the price window is around here. And then having that information is going to give you that, leverage for when you do want to negotiate. In your particular case with the 181, like how did you kind of go about like understanding what was a good price for that book?
I used eBay, I used GPA analysis, I used GoCollect. I looked at different YouTube videos regarding the book, people that were talking about this book from an investment point of view. So I tried to aggregate all my sources to see what is a good price that I'm willing to pay.
But once you have kind of done all that research, that kind of leads us, I think, to the tip number 3 that I think is important to talk about here. And that's come up with a plan. Coming up with a plan, I think, is just another big part of this. And there's a couple different ways we can kind of look at this tip. And I think we can talk about the various forms of it. But coming up with a plan is like maybe one, okay, well, where are you going to find, this book? Assuming it's a grail like Hulk 181, it's not that every LCS is going to have one available to you,
right?
Especially like at the grade you want, and especially being priced in what you've determined as like a good price for it. And then also, presumably this is going to be a big purchase for someone out there. So, financially, are you going to come up with a plan? I mean, maybe if you have like, money ain't a thing and you got Bezos pockets, like you're probably not sweating it. But I think for a lot of people, you may want to come up with like a little bit of a financial plan.
I would say, like we mentioned, because with my price range, like the 3.0 to 5.0 is kind of like where I was sitting at. So the thing is, when you kind of go lower on the grading scale, you kind of also limit your selections available to you that you're willing to pay. Because the thing is, I did see a couple of Hulk 181s, but people are selling in the 8.0s. 7.0s. When you kind of limit your selections, you have to be a bit more diligent in terms of seeking out not just one source. I know people go to eBay, that's one, but you may also want to start asking neighboring LCSs, because just because they don't have it on the wall doesn't mean that, because LCSs always come across collection. It doesn't hurt for you to just put your name for the Hulk 181, because he said that chances are whenever we get those kind of books, it never lasts on the wall, because those books tend to disappear pretty fast because someone else is already has that on the search list. So talk to different LCSs, because they have a lot more resources available to them where they come across these big collections and they come across these grails. Things are kind of opening up. Visit cons, shows. We're starting to get a lot of that now that restrictions have been a bit more loosened, and at least you're there in person as well. So you have multiple vendors, and they most likely, like the big shows, tend to bring their their big books. So you have a greater chance of finding your grails in those arenas. Yeah, and in terms of like sacrifices and all that, like I know that in your case, you talk about funding the hobby and all that.
Yeah.
So the issue with me is I have this, like sometimes I'll buy these books and then my intention is to sell them to pay for the hobby. The problem is sometimes I get a bit too attached to these books and they end up staying in the collection.
A lot of people actually have mentioned that to me as well, where it's like, that's the one problem, Swag, with your tips about selling books is that means that you have to sell some books.
But see, knowing that, I had to be honest with myself, and I knew that, like, for me, funding the hobby might not be my path. So my path might have to be cutting down. So in my case, for a while, I was spending quite a bit on comic book day books. So that was one area where I drastically cut down on my pull list. and even just back bin hunting. If I'm at an LCS, I can't help but hunt. So what I had to do was I had to consciously limit my visits to LCS. Instead of going on a weekly basis, I would go once every few weeks.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's definitely discipline. And I think like that, but to the point of tip number 3 and coming up with a plan, if you know yourself and you know you need to put those caps on your comic hobby and your habits, I think that is like all, a part of the equation of just like having that plan.
Write it, like put it pen to paper, like because I have a bit of a accounting finance background. What I did was I mapped out on Excel how much I make a month, like on my monthly income or whatever source of income you have. Figure out what your expenses are, and then figure out how much money you have left over.
Right. That
way you can kind of figure out what's your unnecessary expenses, food and shelter, whatever, and then what's your luxury expenses and where you can cut back on to kind of go for those grails. So for me, at least, that helped because it kind of gave me a clear pathway in terms of how long it would take for me to get such, grail.
Yeah. No, and actually that's a really great tip in terms of like, even beyond that of comic book collecting. I mean, I think really understanding the finances and writing things down, like you'd be surprised, like if you figure out, how much extra cash you have, you can back yourself into that number or that grail that really feels insurmountable as far as like when you just think of the sticker price. But if you think to yourself, okay, and you do all the math, it's like, oh, I just save 100 here, save 100 there. And then sooner or later over a few months, you might have that budget that you need. And so I think that is definitely a really good part of coming up with a plan. And now I think, this leads us to tip number 4, which is this is the time to execute. And I kind of wanted to summarize this tip as as such: be aggressively patient. And I think that obviously that doesn't really make sense because how can you be aggressively patient? But this is kind of like the funny thing with, I think, buying that grail is like, now you've done the research, you've identified it, you've come up with a plan, and you really have to kind of do this dance of like, you need to be active and proactive and aggressive. And like you said, maybe you're going to comic book shows, maybe you're popping into every claim sale you see on Instagram, maybe you're constantly searching eBay. So you're aggressive in that sense. But in being aggressive and being proactive with it, you also still need to be patient. You may get frustrated and just want to buy that, Avengers #1 and things like that. Yeah. And even just for me, like this is something when I got my Avengers 1, I knew, I had my plan and everything. And there was one Avengers 1 at an LCS near me. Basically, it was just like a little more than I wanted to pay, but it was like right there. And I just for me, I was like, okay, it's just for whatever reason, it doesn't feel right. It's not the right one. So I had to like exercise a little bit of patience while also being very, very proactive. And then I eventually found the one that was right for me.
My thing is, even for something like a lot less dollar value, I've always been the type of person that tends to sleep on things at least a day or two before pulling the trigger, on a big ticket item. So it was one of those things that I kind of had to, like you said, like in your case, I had to step back, had to go back to home base and just kind of reassess things. Aggressively patient sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but like the thing is, like you don't want to drag it on too long either, because these things, like I mentioned, Hulk 181s are few and far between. So you don't want to drag your feet and someone else snatches it up.
You've put yourself on this journey. This is the book that you want. So when you see that opportunity, like carpe diem, right? Like just you gotta seize it. But I will also say, to your point, I've made a lot of really what I feel really confident purchases when I found a book at an LCS. And then I actually did go home and sleep on it. And then the next day I went back to swoop it up, because not necessarily for a grail. Maybe it was like a $100 book or $150 book, but like things like that. And that to me is that sort of aggressive, patient behavior where, I'm proactive. I'm looking at the books. I'm trying to figure out if they're good deals and stuff, but like you still exercise just a little bit of patience just to make sure you don't have that regret. Which brings us to, kind of the last tip, but maybe it is the most important one. And maybe, I don't know if this is so much of a tip, but still important to kind of talk about. But that is number 5, enjoy the book. Really, really enjoy the book. This is a really big moment. And it's sort of hard to share like what it really feels like. At least for me, it was a very hyper real moment because it's like a mixture of like a journey and almost like an accomplishment and like nostalgia and your identity mixed together in the form of a book that you want to appreciate. That's why I think it can be overwhelming. And so I think for me, enjoying the book is, it's like, once you have it, take the time to really, really appreciate it, whether that is to say share it with the comic book community. I mean, you don't have to do it on YouTube, but like maybe you can post it on Instagram. Or I showed it to like my family and I shared it with Mrs. Swag, and she likes the Marvel movies, but she's not super in the comic books. But like, at least I was having that experience where I felt like I needed to share it with people. And I think that little ceremony made it more special for me.
I remember when you dropped that video and, you posted your Avengers one, I was like, okay, I want to have that kind of feeling. Like in my case, when I got the Hulk 181, I am not going to lie, I was a bit choked up when I got the book, because the thing is, so often I held that book, but it wasn't like, I didn't own it. Like, I just held it. So knowing the fact that, I made that payment and now it's in my hands, it was like an oh crap moment. It's like, this is actually mine now.
Right.
So it was a bit of it was a lot to take in, because for me also, I don't know how long your journey was to Avengers 1. For me, it was almost like 4 years in the making, almost. Like when I got back from the hobby till now. So listen, I challenge anyone, when you get your Grail, tell me what your feeling is when you actually, and I do hope you guys all get your Grail, because it's one of those things that you should kind of cherish that moment. Because like I said, this is one of those things that is going to be few and far between.
All right. Well, that is our 5 tips for, helping you guys kind of make that purchase for your Grail. I wish you all, the best of luck out there. If you're going to be making that big purchase, definitely feel free to, share it in the spirit of the last tip with me here, or maybe Hyper, when you do make that purchase. But I want to say, Hyper, thank you so much for coming onto the channel and talking about your Grail purchasing. Congratulations once again on your 181.
Yeah, listen, just the fact that we're even having this conversation of me getting this 181 and, in your case, getting the Avengers one, it's a good feeling. So that's why I kind of wish that on everyone else in the community, that you guys, whatever Grail it may be, big or small, at some point you guys can hopefully, implement these plans and you can acquire those Grails that you've been, seeking for.
Absolutely. That's all for this video. Like, comment, subscribe. Go check out the Comic Kingpins and Hyper over on his channel, and I will see you all in the next video.